Matt Kassin from Revolutionary Tracker is going to be joining us as well. Come on up, Matt. And finally, we have Michael Wolf. And what we have basically here are two analysts. Angela, of course, is Gartner's wearable tech guru, and she's got lots of interesting insights and hard statistics on where she and Gartner think the market's going. Mike, on the other side there, spends a lot of time not only covering and exploring and digging into the consumer market, but he talks to a lot of wearable tech folks and has his own perspective. And in the middle there, we've got two guys who hope that the wearable tech market's going to become extraordinarily huge. Right? All right, so let's, I'll just throw out a number, 50 billion. Last July, somewhere along the lines, I and some others started talking about 50 billion as being a potential, upper range for where wearable tech could be inside of 5 years. The reality is it'll be somewhere between that number and a much smaller number. And you heard yesterday from our investor group that there's a lot of uncertainty still in wearable tech, but underneath that uncertainty, there's a lot of belief that it really is going to be going in a substantial direction. So taking off on that, Angela, I'm going to ask you to maybe give us a perspective from yours and Gartner's point of view on where wearable tech is really going to end up.
Wow, how far out am I supposed to look, Tony?
Oh, well, 5 years in terms of what you and Gartner think the market might be. But, you can look out further than that if you think that it warrants it.
All right, well.
We like to ask the real questions.
Yeah, that's a great, so first let's think about the different segments in the market, because they all will evolve at different rates. We have the strongest growing segment now, which is in consumer health and fitness. We have a growing segment in wrist-worn consumer devices, and then in the devices we wear on our head. And I view those devices, although they have many different applications, as some of them are positioned to be companions to the smartphone. And others will have their own purpose, for example, be a wearable camera that has its own function. Then we have the medical applications and the military applications. As far as consumer versus industry, we're seeing the consumer fitness market leading the way. But for the other types of wearables, the wearable cameras in particular, industry applications are growing quite quickly. In fact, I'm just delighted that a couple of times a week I get a call from a big company. They're looking to see what deployments they should have next year of wearable electronics to help their companies be more productive. So where I see us as an industry being in 5 years is certainly the consumer fitness will grow significantly. We'll have a lot of productivity gains in the enterprise sector, and health monitoring, because of all the FDA around it, the real health medical devices will just start to be taking off.
Okay, so do you have a sense of a number in dollars in terms of, say, total wearable market size in 5 years? I mean, I threw out that $50 billion number. Of course, I would love it to be a $50 billion market.
Right. We need to.
And you can hedge your bets.
I can hedge my bets.
Sure.
Well, let's look at the different components of those. For example, if we're looking at smartwatches, we really haven't had a smartwatch that's captured consumer interest, large consumer interest at this point. Now, if we do, we could in 5 years see that as being $20, $25 million market. But if it doesn't, it certainly will grow, but at a much slower rate. Let's, maybe even be less than 10 million. At this point, when you have such disparities in what's going to happen in the market, putting one number around it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's fair. Not sure Samsung would be looking at a $10 million market myself.
I think the reason why VCs are interested, but they're not jumping in a large way, is there's so much uncertainty about the form factor, right? I think it's clear that there's large overlying trends that are pushing us towards wearables being important. Miniaturization, sensors becoming lower cost. All the hard work's been done around things like discovery protocols. Over the last 10 years, there's been so much great work done around networks and sub-protocols to make all this possible. But when you try to ask what the actual form factor of it's going to be, if it's going to be a smartwatch, a smart glass, I don't know. But what I can say when I evaluate markets, I look at how broadly applicable they are. And I think wearable technology is hugely applicable across a huge number of verticals in the enterprise and industrial space. And in the consumer space, I think it's also going to be important. Now, that consumer is always harder to predict because it's, there's something like if a smartwatch rolls out into Best Buy and Best Buy hates it, maybe Best Buy stops carrying smartwatches a year from now, and that could hurt the market. So I think it's hard to put a number on it, and it's hard to say what form factors. I think looking at a 10-year time horizon, there's no doubt that it'll be a $50 billion market. But if I could tell you which ones it was, I'd be a lot richer, and I wouldn't be up here on stage as an analyst.
Yeah, of course. All right, so Matt, from where you sit, you sort of bridge both the consumer and possibly the medical industry. And obviously you're in it because you think that there is a substantial market. So what's your sense of the market dynamics in terms of the research that you've done in determining if you should be investing your time in this?
Sure, and you have to understand, we built this business from a very organic place. I mean, we started as working parents that wanted to. Our user case was our primary need, and we saw this need. We wanted to address it. That's the typical American entrepreneur story, right? That's how things get started. It was, I think, looking at those user cases, which a lot of the bigger companies and investor community as well labeled as niche markets, that were pretty huge to us. Now, being a startup, we don't need to sell billions of units. We're very happy selling millions of units. And then, of course, based on not only our research, but also a lot of anecdotal feedback and inquiry directed towards us. I've been in sales my whole life, and I spent a lot of time going out and soliciting business. So when it comes into me, when somebody sees something that we're developing and that representative of a significant group and says, when can we have these things, you start to get a sense that the need that you saw that you thought was this big really could be this big. And again, all anecdotal, I can't throw numbers against it, but we knew that there was a tremendous amount of need that went far beyond even what the substantial niche markets that we saw. And then if we had, and I think that this is a great metaphor for the rest of the industry, if what folks develop can have, it can be from a platform approach. So whether you're talking about the device side, the hardware side, or the software side, that it can be open and flexible enough that through nominal amounts of development and modification, you can broaden the scope of the applications, again, both of the hardware and the software, that you've got a very significant need out there.
Okay, so yesterday, during your demo forum, you showed us, I think, a final slide that had some much cooler looking devices than what you actually have now. Now I understand that the device you do have is very sophisticated. It's essentially a phone on your wrist, right, with the GPS capability. So from your perspective, what needs to happen for you to feel comfortable to take it to that next design level? That kind of transition point where you go from feeling like you're still a tech company to becoming a real business inside of a real wearable tech market?
You know,
And let me just say that from my perspective, when I, do briefings with companies, I'm always trying to get a sense of, do they really believe there's a market here? Do they really believe there's going to be a market growth, or are they just sort of dreaming? And I'll return back to that dreaming aspect of it, because in fact it's very important. But so from that sense of there's a real market, when do you make the transition point?
I don't know. I guess sales will prove everything out. Adoptability is really the key here. I think when you start to hit revenue, or not revenue, but sales of units, and that people start to adopt, and especially with us, because it's not just a device, but it's really an approach, it's an application. When people start to adopt it and use it on a grander scale that we envision, that's when it becomes a real business. You talked about the two different devices that we developed, and that was key in that we don't want to be one of those companies that one device fits all. We actually are developing devices, again, off of a platform that through minimal amounts of modifications, we can have something that addresses both children and seniors. And then we know that after those early adopters, there's going to be folks that are going to demand a higher level of aesthetic, fashion-forward kinds of looks and feels, and that's what that second next-gen watch will be. And I think that, understanding that to build a solid business that's going to appeal to a broader base will require that you address those different groups.
Okay. So Chris, I've actually been following Pivothead since the early days. Been keeping an eye on you guys, and
Cool.
I gotta say, when the first generation, I would say to myself, well, that's nice. And you have a device where you can, capture additional video by plugging in a wire. And then recently, obviously with the smart technology, I started to see that you're really you're making that transition from a techie company without a real market to a company that's becoming a real business. Now, obviously you're doing that because you got a lot of feedback from users, which means that you're getting users, which is critical. So give me a sense of what sort of things, I'll say, give me the case study of Pivothead from, when you first thought up the idea to where it became obvious to you or clear that the dreaming went from that to something that could be very real. And then how did you make the transition to really developing the smart technology, which for me is a huge leap from where you were?
Right. So originally I had the idea to do this basically considering law enforcement and the applications for true point of view, hands-free applications for liability, for training, for all sorts of circumstances. So if you look at how police use dash cams today, it's very limited. It basically looks in front of the car, there's no audio. You get a lot of great video even from that, but it's very limited. So if the cop walks up to a car, pulls somebody over, and all of a sudden from the dash cam you see the officer, draw his gun and shoot the driver, and he says, hey, the guy pulled a gun, but you don't see that. But if he's wearing the camera and he's still able to do his job and focus on his job without being concerned about taking the video or looking through a viewfinder, all of a sudden you have more proof. Or let's say the cop does something where he shouldn't do, and then there you have that proof there as well. So we started thinking about that, and it quickly became apparent that that same case study or those scenarios were pretty much applicable to everything, from enterprise to just consumers, and whether it be a mother holding up her baby and not being worried about holding a viewfinder and getting that direct, intimate eye contact directly with her kid. I mean, it's very valuable memories that previously were uncapturable. So, that's kind of what the genesis of the idea of where it started. And, there's some cheap kind of spy cams in the market, coming from China, just commodity stuff, just really poor quality, everything. And so I spent a little time looking at that and was like, these guys have it all wrong. It's a pinhole camera, the quality's awful, you get one selection, they're uncomfortable, and they're targeting having a spy market. How big is the spy market? So I don't think anybody would really want to be caught dead with those things, or at least 99.9% of the people. So, we really kind of developed it as, hey, it's more of a lifestyle. Look at the true applications and benefits of this hands-free, true point of view video. Our lens obviously is much bigger. It's apparent. We're not trying to hide anything. And, bringing the individuality to it as well. We launched with 16 styles, 4 different models, different colors, different types of lenses, because people in different markets, or a cop is going to want something different than a mother. So that's why we kind of launched with this full line. And even looking at, say, GoPro, technically they're a wearable technology as well, and they innovated a new form factor, but they're still in a box. But you're mounting this to your helmet, you're strapping it to your chest, and those guys crushed everybody, and they're still the fastest growing camera in the world, I believe. So, they're not really considered wearable tech, but why shouldn't they be? So, for me at least, looking at the wearable tech industry as a whole, I'm probably as confused as everybody is about the whole overall category. But I believe that we're in the imaging industry. And what's happening in imaging is really, really interesting. That's evolving rapidly with all of the microprocessors and the miniaturization, the interactivity. Those capabilities just keep exponentially growing. And so, to me, I think there's kind of an evolution. I mean, if we look back at the very first camera, it was in a box. And then the point and shoot, and everything's always been in the box. And GoPro is in the box, but yet they had a new way to apply that box. And it became wearable, and it became hands-free. So, at least in my opinion, I think maybe these new form factors are the next evolution in imaging, and really taking advantage of new technologies in interactivity, and miniaturization, and sensors, and all the software, and all the really cool things that you can do. And this has kind of given rise to, I guess, what's called the smart glass industry. So, I don't know how everything is going to shake out in terms of whether wearable technology will continue as one industry, or if it will dissipate and continue to grow, but just go back into your own pockets of your own industries. Like, Nike, they could potentially have a basic sensor in every pair of athletic shoes they sell in 5 years, and that would be $6 billion right there. But am I in the same industry as Nike? No, not even close. So just because they have a sensor doesn't mean I should be remotely connected to Nike in terms of being in the same industry or business. So smart, we kind of, and I still view us as almost straddling 2 different markets, and we're kind of in a fuzzy area of, okay, are we smart glass, or are we still at our core a camera? And to me at least, this is all the evolution of what a camera is capable of doing. So I just see all these really cool technologies that are able to enhance the definition of imaging itself.
So, Angela,
Yes.
Gartner and its hype cycles.
Right.
I haven't looked at the latest one. Do we have one for wearable tech? And even if we don't, where do you think we currently are?
Wearable tech is pretty much at the top of the hype cycle. Okay, so the hype cycle, for those of you who might not be so familiar with it, it's basically you go up the curve and you're an emerging technology, and then there's so much adulation about it, and media and press and everything. Expectations get overly high, and you reach the top of the hype cycle. And then in the next few years, people get a bit disillusioned, and they come back down, and there's a trough of disillusionment, it's called. And then slowly the real work begins, where we're coming out of that and finding real applications and usages and all of the technical and software pieces, and the carriers all come together to give us a mobile technology that is usable and adopted. So, of course, there's many different kinds of wearables, but yeah, wearable computing, we're kind of up there at the top of the hype cycle, and some of it's been led by Google Glass. I think we're starting to come down the curve on the smartwatches into a bit of disillusionment. That's one way to look at it. So, Chris, you were talking about the wearable cameras, and what I'm seeing for those, even though Google Glass is at the top of the hype, we're seeing a lot of a lot of really useful applications coming through industry. You mentioned law enforcement, field service, for example, and that's in addition to having a camera that makes a record, you can stream that video back to an expert at home base who can then guide you through the repair, through the diagnosis. And it's saving millions of dollars, because you don't have to get another person on the plane to go out there and help someone, and it's making repairs quicker. So that's another way that cameras are really becoming one of the leading and growing segments in wearable tech.
Okay. Mike, from where you're sitting, and as you talk to a lot of these wearable tech companies, what's your sense of how many of them really have a future as opposed to kind of like falling off that hype cycle and disappearing and not even making it through the trough of disillusionment?
I mean, yeah, the success rate for startups is low, let's be honest. And that's why it's easier to be an analyst than it is to be a startup entrepreneur. So I admire these guys, and I think they're making conscious choices about what the form factor is going to be. They're looking at forks in the road, and they're going down a certain path. And I think that's where risk is, but I think you start to abstract a little bit and look at the broader opportunity. It's clear that there's huge opportunity. I think it's an oversimplification to say that, to use and I'm not dissing on the Gartner hype cycle, but to say wearable is at the height, I think you have to kind of start to segment it a little bit. Sure, certain consumer classifications of wearables, I think, are probably at the precipice. I think that, like Angela said, there's certain industrial applications that I think there's huge real-world applications where, forget drones. I think Bezos was just saying that to get a great advertisement the day before Thanksgiving shopping day weekend. But I can guarantee you Bezos has given some thought to using smart glasses in his warehouses, because I think anytime there's a technology that can make workers highly efficient, the applications of using smart glasses on the retail storefront, or using, that was a startup talking about that communication device that allows you to more efficiently act at retail. I mean, there's billions of dollars wasted every year with inefficient retail workers and inefficient warehouse workers. And I think these technologies are probably at the point where they're ready, are close to being ready. The software frameworks are being developed. So sure, there's going to be tons of startups. I mean, 90% failure rates for startups in this space, but I think there's going to be some home runs. And I think consumers are probably a little more risky than industrial and enterprise, because there's probably, I can envision more practical applications right away, and I think consumers are more fickle, Sure. So, so I talked to a lot of them, and I think a lot of them will be gone. And then, of course, these guys won't. These guys are going to hit home runs. But.
I think a big thing that we seem to be missing here is that, if you're choosing to come out and launch a business with a wearable device because, everybody's coming out with a watch, so, I'll do something cool with a watch. and it's been said many times yesterday, there's got to be some intrinsic value to the fact that it's wearable. So to come out with another watch that's tethered to another phone, but we have different kinds of alerts, I expect there to be a dip. Everybody's going to jump on it saying, I got to have a watch with my phone because I want that look and feel. But I think the consumer has already felt a certain kind of disappointment in what's the real value here. You know, if you look at our user case of putting a phone on a kid, rather than give a child a phone that they could drop and lose and stick in a backpack, to wear it isn't a cool factor. We actually hope that it helps, and we believe it will help them embrace it more, but it has a very significant and very powerful intrinsic benefit. The fact that it'll be a presence of mind, it won't be left behind. If they get a call, they won't not hear it because it's buried in the backpack. And the same thing with our senior user case. And the same thing with many of these hands-free applications where they actually become lifesavers. So it's not just oh, it's cool, I'm wearing a watch, but I'm a line person or I'm a FedEx truck driver and I need a hands-free way that my corporate office can communicate with me. Those are not trendy reasons to use a wearable tech. Those are essential reasons to use wearable tech, and the fact that it's wearable proves itself out. So I think you need to differentiate folks that are bringing products just because they're trying to jump on the bandwagon and those that have real significant value based on the fact and only the fact that that what they're bringing and the fact that they're wearable really does give you an added value.
Sure. And that actually brings up an interesting point. Now, if you look through the history of technology, and we'll only go back as far as PCs. All right, so we have PCs, we have local area networking, we have Wi-Fi, we even have the internet and the web. None of those really took off until enterprise and business invested billions and billions of dollars in it. PCs were not a consumer product as much as they called them personal computers. Until enterprises started bringing them in at those billions of dollars level, they weren't selling enough to bring the prices down to the point where consumers would buy them. And the same thing for all these other things. I mean, as much as the internet and the web now seems pervasive and you wake up in the morning, of course there's a web thing that I'm going to go to. Until businesses back in the late 90s really started investing in e-commerce or Web 1.0, if they hadn't, there really wouldn't be a web. Now, okay, fast forward a little bit to mobile technology circa 2003, 2004. I was heavily involved in that stuff. And all of us were looking at enterprise to drive mobility. And we kept waiting, and I would circle back with, the 100 or so companies involved in mobile technology. Everyone had the same kind of like call and response. Where's the enterprise? Where are the enterprise dollars? And Nokia and Samsung would try to come out and outcompete each other with some BlackBerry thing. They would all inevitably flop. And we kept asking, when is the enterprise going to wake up and start investing? And then lo and behold, Apple comes along in 2007 and totally changes the way technology grows. All right, so I started using the term consumerization of technology back in '07. And it became crystal clear that wow, consumers are the ones who are suddenly involved, and it was their investments in technology that suddenly drove the mobility market sky high, and then of course through BYOD. The enterprise had to finally be dragged kicking and screaming into the real world of mobility, and it finally happened. So, now an enterprise that's not mobile is basically a Luddite, a laggard, call them what you want, already dead and they just don't know it. Are we seeing a shift back to the enterprise with wearable tech? That's where I'm going with this. There's a lot of consumer stuff out there, but a lot of the uncertainty that I think yesterday's investors and even some of the comments here today were, there's a consumer market, but it may be a consumer market where you have to sell things for a nickel in order to convince the consumer that it's worth buying. Because, you got a mobile phone, it can pretty much do a lot of this stuff. The enterprise, on the other hand, has very specific and significant needs. Now, you, for example, might sell 100,000 devices to consumers at $1. But if, say, a hospital wanted to keep track of its I don't know, 10,000 patients, so that when the first thing they gave them when they came in was no longer that, that plastic thing that they kind of clip on there, but revolutionary tracker device, maybe with some attachment where you can, unfasten it. The nurse could, but you couldn't. Now we're talking about selling 10,000 devices at maybe $500 each. So to me, I'm wondering, and the same thing for you, Chris. It's you were thinking police, right? Well, now you're thinking St. Louis Rams. Lots of other football teams, and then there's the NBA, and then God only knows where that could go. But at the end of the day, those are all enterprises. That's enterprise business. It's not consumer. So all four of you, what's your, and Mike, I'll just start with you and we'll come along this way. What's your sense that there could be a transition back to the enterprise driving the real wearable technology market in the long term?
I think it's hard to try and fit like a one Hollywood narrative to wearables because I think it's a hugely complex market.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm not trying to make it that all in one thing, but I'm trying to see if we can come up with that kind of like push that the industry is going to need to then become self-generating. I
mean, I think the more reliable budget and revenue is going to come from enterprise, but I think the velocity markets are in the consumer space. So iPhone and tablets and e-readers with Kindle, huge adoption velocity, largely driven by low price points and huge innovation on Apple and Amazon's side. I think, I can see the GoPro market moving to glasses, and not to give Christopher a push, but I think I can see that happening because it makes sense that over time, technology gets more discreet and less obvious, and I think that's what's going to happen. I think smart glasses right now are too obvious and too overtly nerdy, but I think over time they'll disappear, and this will be a smart glass. But I do think consumer markets like, for example, augmented reality, take gaming. I think gaming is at a stagnation point. I think the Xbox One is interesting. I think PlayStation 4 is interesting, but I don't think there's been any huge technological innovation leaps with this generation of consoles. I mean, voice is interesting and motion sensing, but that was there. Voice command's been in TVs for 4 years now. But I think the next big leap for gaming is going to be total immersion. So what we saw yesterday with that demo, hugely interesting to me. I think that's more of a proof of concept. But I think when you look at things like Oculus Rift, I mean, that Oculus Rift could be, I mean, that could be a huge shift in gaming because I think that could make gaming totally immersive. So again, I'm not giving you a straight answer because it's a complex answer.
No, of course, but I'm still looking for a general sense.
Yeah.
So Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, go ahead. You're going to have to re-ask the question because I lost it with...
Okay, let me just ask it really simply. Do you think that it will be the enterprise that gives wearable technology that necessary push to get us to that?
Right, and this is going to piggyback on my earlier. I think the applications in the enterprise scenario that are essential, that wearable technology is not going to have a cool factor, it's going to have an essential factor, will obviously help drive it, and when it happens in the enterprise environment, it happens on a much bigger scale, that means bigger dollars. But I think if we really believe in the application of wearable tech, and I think everybody here does, then I would say that both consumer and commercialized or the enterprise side, again, not so much from the number side, but to show that it's applicable and necessary in a diverse setting and a diverse user application. So the enterprise side sure is going to push a lot of volume, but I think it's going to prove itself on both sides where it's really relevant, where it really has meaning. And I think as with a lot of new cool technologies or uses of technologies, everybody wants to jump on, and it's not necessarily relevant, and the irrelevant stuff fades away, and then the real core of that essential need that it could perform more than anything else. And again, we've talked about a policeman approaching a car where he needs hands-free, as would a route truck driver. Or we're working with a large company that gives its line employees that are up in cherry pickers all day iPads, GPS-enabled iPads and and iPhones, but know that in a different scenario, certainly in an emergency situation, those things could fall away and become rendered useless.
Sure.
So now all of a sudden a wearable device becomes an essential lifesaver. And in those kinds of situations, yeah, it's absolutely going to be irreplaceable.
Chris, where do you see your next few years in sales?
So in terms of enterprise or
Yeah.
consumer, it's a good question. I think that we're going to be in both markets. I think both are important. And I think if you just put your chips on enterprise, I think it's definitely the less risky proposition, because, you know, for the consumer, you have to make 1 million sales. You have to be worried about the brand. You have to be worried about so many different things. For enterprise, I think they'll settle a little bit for, oh, okay, it just does that function perfect. You know, we'll take that. It fits our solution, but that solution doesn't necessarily translate to the consumer and them adopting that after something has been developed specifically for industry. So, you know, hey, they're glasses and it's on your face, and it's a very personal part of, you know, who you are. And even if it takes amazing video, you know, if you're self-conscious about it, or, you know, you feel that you don't look very good, you know, you're probably not going to wear it. So I feel it's very important for us to be very strong in the consumer market, because we're going to really know what people want, how people use them, and if sorry, I just lost my train of thought there.
I do that all the time.
Yeah, so basically, if we figure out what the consumer wants and what the consumer needs, I believe that really translates well into enterprise, not just from a use case factor, but in terms of cost. So we are, you know, for all of the smart glasses on the market, I think that we are substantially less than anything out there. But if you look at our specs and our capabilities, you know, we're in many cases stronger in certain sets, and, you know, we don't have a heads-up display, but at the moment I think that's wasted cost, and I don't think consumers want a viewing screen above their eye right now. And in terms of enterprise, you know, there's other ways to handle not having the viewing screen right there, whether that's on a watch or on your smartphone or on a secondary thing or other notifications. You know, there's so many challenges there with the heads-up display, so I think we're years away from really figuring out how to do that properly. So, you know, I don't know what's going to happen with Google Glass, and, you know, there's experts that have been wearing these things for many, many years in different form factors, but, you know, they note that there are, you know, strange things can happen with your eyes. It can cause nausea. I don't think those full effects are even known yet, what it does to the vision. I mean, I don't know if you guys ever seen The Jerk with Steve Martin. I mean, everybody's going to start walking around cross-eyed. So I don't know. I'm not ready to go into the heads-up display as kind of a permanent feature. I don't think it's consumer ready, but there's other ways to get the identical feedback than just that. So if we are able to do that well on the consumer side, I think that enterprises are going to adopt that solution.
Well, yeah. Another way to slice this question is, over the last 5 years, the human-computer interface that's really captured consumer imagination and adoption has been the touchscreen. And that's changing now. Certainly, touchscreens are still cool, and they're being implemented in more and more types of products, but now it's voice. Voice dialing has been around a while, but now voice search. And with that, you won't necessarily be tied to picking up a device out of your bag and looking at it. You can just have glanceable displays and get most of your information through your ear. Since we don't want to be talking to our wrist most of the time, or you know, it's going to be much more convenient to get our information through headsets. And if we look across the different types of wearables that are coming out, many of those benefit from having a headset, whether it's a Bluetooth wireless or in the retail setting, maybe even more with wires. But that's having voice capability as a growing important way to interface with computing is going to drive the growth of headsets with all types of sensors on them.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the audience? I can't see anybody, so if you raise your hand, just shout it out.
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay.
Do you think it's more important to think about this as the wearable tech industry, in which a lot of is happening and everyone wants to be aware of it because of the potential impact, or is it more important to ask what business am I in, which is what I heard Chris ask himself and answer without saying the question. I think it's both are valuable, but I think everyone, as we're noticing all the variables in the air here, we all have to ask ourselves what business am I in? And it's not necessarily the wearable tech business, we're both potentially affected by it. And that's the risk, that's the uncertainty, because we don't know how it's going to affect the business I'm in. Is that a fair question?
David, Mike, why don't you grab that one or start?
I think so. I mean, the end game isn't just to create a wearable, it's to be in the fashion industry or create an amazing gaming experience or make a really cool smart home central hub interface or command center or to do retail work more efficiently. So I think that is a great lens through which to view this if you're kind of trying to look in the mirror and figuring out what product you should create. I think you need to move beyond, am I just going to create a wearable, because that's not really what the end game is. What the end game is creating a great product in fashion or retail or whatever. So I agree with what you're saying there.
One thing that Hamid from Centoplex mentioned earlier today was he saw that the smaller companies should really be focusing on particular use cases in order to be successful, instead of trying to produce the gadget that does everything. And that also pertains to your question and comment. Certainly the usage comes first, and the device that does that particular thing well is important, and is a way for the smaller companies with perhaps the less known brands to enter the consumer market, because people who have those needs will certainly seek out those specific types of capabilities in your product.
Other questions? Okay. We only have like 7 minutes left, so it's going to just kind of a wrap-up question for each of you. Over the next 5 years, I'll start with you on this side, and we'll go that way.
Okay.
Over the next 5 years, what are some of the things in wearable tech that you would like to see happen in terms of feeling good about the market? And let's throw the hype curve thing out. Let's throw the numbers out. I'm talking more in terms of what these wearable products can do. Maybe even throw in, how fashion, in fact, will play in all this. And just some general things that you think will help the market to become that $50 billion market.
Over the next 5 years, what is important for enabling the market is what we've seen some companies do, but it's imperative for your wearable device to put out an SDK with all the API hooks, and strongly encourage the developers, the hackathons, to go and innovate apps around the products. That is going to be what really drives the usage. There's many ways we can use these products, and the apps are what will allow us to get the insights out of them.
Chris, you probably would find no argument with that, huh?
No, absolutely not. I mean, just to expand on that a little bit, I think the key is going to be hardware manufacturers also getting together and saying, hey, let's let my firmware talk to your firmware. So somebody goes out and buys that device and he realizes, oh, look at all those other devices that, out of the box can talk to each other. So, different wearable devices have their own kind of niche specialty, but in combination with other wearable devices, in combination with your phone, such as apps, or whether it's a watch, or even walking into a Starbucks and having sensors in the countertop like NFC, and just having that ability to communicate and enhance the value of your product by working together with other products. So as an example, if I've got, say, a Fitbit and my glasses, maybe we can develop a firmware where I'm taking his sensor data, the Fitbit sensor data, and maybe embedding that in a recorded dashboard inside the video. So now all of a sudden you've got an enhanced function of both the wristband or the glasses, or say, Plantronics, like having their type of audio headset and maybe a little whisper boom coming out of the glasses, and using some of their cool firmware and together with video recording. And now all of a sudden you've got some very, very interesting applications. So I think that needs to happen more and more, like actual device manufacturers coming together and producing a really cool functionality that neither one of them can do on their own.
And of course, Pivothead's got its own SDK, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Just introduced.
Absolutely.
Matt?
Yeah, standardization is something I'm looking forward to, especially in the wireless protocols. I get really excited on a couple of levels of, as we ask our devices to do more and more, to collect more information, to give us more data and more feedback about what we're doing. There's a power consumption need. Right now in the space, everybody fights about, I have 5 days, I have 6 days, I have 3 days power supply. I envision the day when wireless charging is a reality, and either a senior that's home-based or somebody walking past a McDonald's and a Starbucks gets their watch automatically charged, and power consumption is something that nobody talks about, while it's doing 3 or 4 times the amount of duty that we ask it to do now. And then integration on the side of, there's all this talk about the connected car and the connected home. When these devices start to talk to each other, and whether we're using wireless technologies or other means, we can have a truly integrated capability to collect information and display it and disseminate that information to a host of different people in our family, in our community, that will allow us really to benefit from that. And again, that's distilling it down to that very human essence of where's the real value. And when we get there, then this wearable technology really just becomes enabling. Outside of the fact that I think it's kind of inherent in our DNA as we develop things that we use in our lives, that we hold in our hands, or that ultimately we wear as extensions of our body. That's the metaphor, but I think it's more than a metaphor. I think that's ultimately it. The final end point would be what? Actually having these things embedded in our bodies. That is not non-invasive, that's invasive.
Yep.
And a lot of people would argue that we're certainly going down that path. That's not something I want to see, but as an extension of our body, something that's easily accessible, that because it's on our body, it can do more than if it were in our pocket. So when you talk about biometrics and healthcare apps, so I not only know where my kid is, but I know what his heart rate is, and my aging father, I actually know what his blood glucose level is. So if I need to give him a call and say, hey, time to take a little insulin, these kinds of things in a connected home or connected car environment will be infinitely useful, and I think we're not that far away from that, or okay. I should say we could be closer than.
All right. And Mike, I'll give you the final word.
Well, I like what these guys said. I mean, it's particularly around standardization. I mean, the technology marketplace is littered with products that were stunted because big players could not agree. I mean, HD DVD is a technology that died in the video space. There's all sorts of examples I could give. So I think interoperability between different consumer electronic provider devices will be huge, both and enterprise level devices. So being able to buy something from Plantronics to work with a Cisco back-end infrastructure in a wearable marketplace is going to be hugely important. So I think that's where big guys matter here. I mean, there's so much innovation on the startup side, but I think big guys really have a part to play, I think, in bringing standards and kind of making this thing a real business. So I'm also excited to see a new breathtaking technology in the consumer side from like an Apple or someone, because I think, you're going to see some of the chips fall maybe next year or the year after, where we may be blown away, and they maybe do something different. Now, maybe not. I mean, everyone has a miss out of 10 hits.
Sure.
They may have a miss, but I'm excited to see what's going to happen next year and the year after that for some of these big consumer brands.
Yeah, I have to agree. Those big consumer brands are certainly still waiting to happen. All right, well, thank you, everyone. That was quite an interesting section.